It's been occupied for, it's like, well, we've been there for a little over 6 years, and, it's been occupied.
Saying, why did you choose Woodcreek? And they said, because it's a family-oriented and our children have the opportunity to interact with their other children. So your vision statement reminded me of that, and I think it's appropriate to the changes that we have seen in some of our residents moving out and others moving in, more families, more children. I want to thank you. It's very thoughtful.
So, anyone else?
I just, looking at Ms. John's statement looks great. I had not seen that. So, and I think there's a lot of similarities in both of ours. So I'd suggest that blending mine with the current one would,
Will you turn
if
this
it's
off
not
now?
already.
The audio is working. Will you turn that off now? Because we have echo. Yes. So we're back on live for everyone at home. Right now, we're working on the vision statement. We have went through our schedule. You will see that schedule roll out in the future.
I didn't realize.
I'd like to make the suggestion that we take Justin's first sentence and blend it into the beginning of the paragraph and then actually end with his last sentence. And if there's too much redundancy in the two, I can kind of make some edits there, but I think it would make great end caps to the other paragraph.
The only thing I would recommend on there is sprinkle a little infrastructure pixie dust on that
Okay.
too, since that's a big thing that we heard about in the survey.
Uh-huh.
You know, just combining, you know, preserving nature, controlling growth, which got in there, and then maintaining quality infrastructure.
Okay.
Particularly growth.
Okay.
All right. Well, I will make these adjustments and bring a second draft of the vision statement to the next meeting for a final reading on it.
Okay. If looking at the vision statement, the last sentence, it is through the promotion of communication and community that our city will preserve its unique charm and endure for generations to come. Maybe since we talk about the peace and quiet at the beginning, if, you know, consider, if we don't want to have something too long, consider shortening that sentence and including what he said.
Okay.
I mean, that's a thought.
Okay.
It could, because, yeah, we don't want a vision statement to be a page long. Okay, so you're going to bring another?
Yep, a second draft.
Okay, so let's, for the meeting on April 6th, hopefully we will have a final draft to approve. Thank you, Justin, very much.
Are there any further comments on the vision statement? I don't want to rush anyone. So if there's anything else coming up. Okay.
One thing I did notice is the vision statement in the packet uses the word seeks,
Okay,
and in Justin's, there the word is used more. So I guess I would maybe try to use the aspirational language. But since it is a vision statement, it's
Right.
not where we are right now, because is, even though in the context of the sentence, it's aspirational, but if we can just use that kind of verbiage.
Pat, would you like to sit over here since Jason is absent, so you have your own microphone?
Will do.
All right, so we'll stick with the aspirational future. I mean, I think it's okay to stay where we're at and where we're headed, so I'll kind of work on that, but I agree. We need to remember it's a forward-thinking document, forward-thinking vision. All right, so number 4 on our regular agenda is to review, discuss, and edit the working draft of the comprehensive plan. So from the vision statement, we move into a background. This is a brief overview of what a comprehensive plan is and does. And then from there, you'll see the table of contents, which might need to be added to, but what I did is kind of removed some of the excess language that was there for planning and start to give us a visual of what this document will actually look like at the end. And then from there, we move into the introduction and the overview of Woodcreek. So hopefully you had a chance to review this in advance, and if you did not, we understand that might be the case. Again, this is a working document, so if in the future you do have suggestions or edits, we will be open to them essentially until we have that final first draft solidified.
I see something, it uses the acronym ETJ without identifying what that stands for.
Okay.
Death to all acronyms.
City planners punish their children, make them say extraterritorial jurisdiction 45 times in a row.
So I see a formatting issue on the table of contents. One area is still italicized. I'll fix that. There's some interesting spacing going on number 7, or the Roman numeral 7. I can't get that tab out of there. I'm not really sure why it's there. Yeah, it's a part of the document formatting. It was automatic, so.
Is this a Google Doc or a Word doc?
It is a Microsoft Office
Word.
suite doc.
Okay.
Word, yeah.
Word, yeah.
And last time we had talked about with the focus groups, we were going to have natural systems, physical systems. So maybe as far as in the current conditions,
Okay,
we can incorporate that.
that language.
Yeah. That way, as it starts to take shape, yeah, so we have,
Current conditions?
yeah, so I would say for parks and open space and environment, I would recommend those two could be combined in the natural systems.
Okay.
And then government services could be turned into physical systems. And actually, frankly, parks and open spaces probably be physical. I think open space and parks,
Right.
those are kind of two that get put together frequently, but a lot of times they're different because parks are typically programmed. They're things that you actually invest money and resources into, whereas open space is typically more natural, preserved environmental factors. So I'd recommend
Okay.
in this section for current conditions, that's the assessment. So I break that down into physical systems and natural systems. Physical systems is services, roads, whatever services the city. We don't have water and sewer, but other systems in there. And then for natural systems, have open space, environment, trees, that kind of natural system.
One question on that. You were talking about infrastructure with parks and, but the open spaces it sounds kind of like in the context of what you were saying, it's our current open spaces. But if we were looking at the acquisition of land, would that still fit easily into that area?
Well, yeah, I think that would probably, if you're looking at acquisition of land, that would probably fit into the vision section,
Okay,
the future park. So that would be one of the goals that you put in.
okay.
This is just kind of an assessment. This is mainly the existing conditions assessment.
So.
So with that in mind,
Physical systems?
That'd be my recommendation, linking this up with the focus groups as much as possible.
okay, so with that in mind, where it says our vision in the future of Woodcreek, should we replicate that structure?
As much as possible.
Okay.
Just, everybody feel free. This is a work session. If you have some questions, comments, but I think those are,
In overview of Woodcreek on page 10, is it appropriate for oak tree to be capitalized in the first paragraph of overview?
Let me see. So first paragraph with its, okay, so oak, since it's a name, yes, tree should not, probably. It should maybe say live oak as well, although there's different, I don't know. I'll have to, because if it's a proper noun, it should be capitalized, but then I think the proper noun is live oak.
I don't think,
Those aren't
I don't think
proper.
species names are normally capital.
Okay.
considered
They're
proper
not
nouns.
capitalized.
Okay.
And then also on the page 11, Woodcreek is known for its iconic capital C championship 18-hole course. That
No
seems like it
capital.
should be lowercase.
Yeah, good catch.
Just to kind of bookend on the current conditions, yeah, I'd recommend simplifying that into physical systems, which consist of roads, parks, and facilities, generally, and other physical systems. And then natural systems, the open space, environment. Looking at, the tree, the heritage trees that we have in this community. And so these are existing conditions that we'll be building off of for the future vision.
Yeah, so replicate the outline again.
Exactly.
Right.
Because you're focusing on analyzing and drawing attention to the things that make this community what it is, things that are reflected in the vision statement. So once we build that strong assessment of it, we know what we have, what we want to preserve and what we want to build on, then we can build on that in the vision section. I'd also recommend, for demographics, I understand that to look at market and demographics. Those two usually go together because it's key to look at the demographics that we have, but also look at the market conditions that we have. That way, that'll link in really strongly with our approach to growth in the vision. It's a good idea, as I always use kind of the war analogy, it's a good idea to know what troops are on the horizon, know what single family challenges the city's going to get, what kind of development's going to be, coming in the ETJ. So yeah, strong. So I transition that from demographics to market demographics. Then for land use, that's pretty simple. So keeping that the way it is.
If I may, again, on page 11, towards the end of the second paragraph, however, Hayes County has become one of the fastest growing areas in the county.
Yeah, state. Good job.
Should be country.
Oh, country. That's probably what I meant. Country with an R.
on page 11, the one on the city, the steady growth rate of a little over 1% per year. We did look in the 2020 census, we did have a I would like to note there the increase that we saw at that time, which in fact was the highest, higher than Wimberley. I think there was even an article that was done by Carol Wilson in the Wimberley View in the newspaper, and I believe it was about 11% that it had seen the growth. Am I right, Brenton?
Pardon?
The growth in the reflected by the 2020 census was about 11%,
We were 21% growth.
Hmm?
21%.
21?
Yes.
Since the last census, right?
From 2010 to 2000.
Okay.
Yes.
I knew it was a 1 in there, but
So it's more like 2% per year then. So if we've grown 21%, is that what you said?
21%.
So if we've grown 21% in 10 years, that means it's about a 2%.
yeah,
Per
that was seen in the decade, that was between the last census, so it was about, in the decade, so about 2% per year.
Yeah, it's too bad that we can't actually chart this on a year-by-year basis, because I think that in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a real spike, to use COVID terminology, in the number of people that have moved into Woodcreek with all of the new houses and a lot of the development. I don't know.
You do also need to remember the apartment complex was constructed, which that added a large number of population right there.
And
So,
there's no way we can actually track it on a year-by-year basis.
so why don't we change it to say 21% over the last 10 years, just like it really
Okay.
is?
Okay.
If that's accurate. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's true.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
maybe 2% per year average, or over 2% per year for a decade plus would probably be a better.
Well, and maybe what you could do is just put some words in there, which it seems to be increasing in the past few years, or has increased in the past few years. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know, I keep being a pain about the current conditions. I keep going back to that, but I'm focusing on that because one of the key things I want to come out of this meeting is to have for me at least, is a good understanding of some of the things that I can go back as y'all's consultant and start to work on. And so know, okay, what things the committee's going to work on, and then what things we work on, and that'll help me develop a scope of work for Brenton, start to figure out.
Yeah.
That way y'all can get a better idea of, okay, what things do we want to.
So with that in mind, at one point we talked about you going over our previous survey and maybe identifying areas in which it was lacking.
Yep.
And so moving into the focus groups, we're going to be looking at doing additional surveys somehow. So if we could have that information of the previous survey didn't touch on this area at all. We need this focus group to gather more information on that front for us. That would be very helpful.
You got it. That's on the list.
Yes. And then also you are doing you're looking at the land use.
Looking at land use, yes, ma'am. That's on my list. And the other thing that I wanted to kind of talk about a little bit more real fast, in the initial assessment that we'd sent over, we talked about doing fiscal analysis too. That way, doing a fiscal analysis of the current fiscal makeup of the city. So you can use that kind of as a benchmark for looking and analyzing future development and the fiscal impacts that could potentially bring to the city. So, because there's always, for lack of better words, I always use the comparison of widgets. Each house, each apartment complex, each business is kind of like a widget. And, it costs money to be able to produce that widget. It costs money for the city to be able to support those particular land uses. And then there's always a relationship with, okay, what kind of sales tax, what kind of ad valorem tax are these particular land uses giving us back? And at the end of the day, just like a company looks at, these widgets making enough money to produce, you look at land use from the same perspective. Are the land uses we have costing more than they produce? Are, land uses that we're adding or land uses that we anticipate to get in the future? Are those going to end up costing the existing tax base more than they end up paying back in revenue? So that's a key thing to look at. So I definitely recommend that. If it's the pleasure of the working group, I'd recommend that we put that in as something to look at in the current conditions. And that's
When you do these sorts of analyses, do you look at similar residential municipalities like this and see what their expenditures are relative to ours?
You can.
Is there any merit in that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's always good to look at other municipalities just to see how they're performing versus how your city's performing. I mean, at the end of the day, typically lower density uses are going to produce less revenue than higher density uses, but it depends on the value. I mean, you could have, two $250,000 homes on a half an acre and then have one $500,000 home on a half an acre. So you're still going to get the same amount of ad valorem. So there's no perfect formula for it, but at the end of the day, it's really a function of looking at your community and trying to figure out how the existing land uses that you have, how much they're costing in city services. And then once you get an idea, just sort of like looking at a business is either profitable or it's not, and so that's a function of the particular widgets that you manufacture in your community. But to your point, you can always look at other communities and see, hey, wow, this community's got this type of housing, or this community doesn't have any garden style apartments. They have these types of developments, and look how much better they perform. So you can look at other communities for the solutions that they're employing from a land use perspective to see how they're trying to increase their revenues while maybe keeping their expenses where they are, or maybe even lowering their expenses. So you can look at the tools that they do and just how the physical makeup of their community is.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Do you all have any more feedback on what we have so far? Again, you can bring more to a future meeting. It doesn't have to happen today. This is a living, working document until we send it off to P&Z, and then it needs to be a little bit finalized at that point.
And one other thing, on the environment too, that's something, I just wanted to jump into that a little bit more. I think a good level of environmental analysis is important on the existing conditions, and I'd say particularly for the ETJ. I know, I've stressed, how much I think challenge this community is going to have in the next 10 to 15 years with its ETJ, with new development wanting to come in. And so looking, doing a base level analysis for ETJ, just, some of the natural features that you've got, looking at topography, terrain, looking at slopes that you have. Those are things that could help this plan in the vision section maybe start to give direction to new environmental regulations like steep slopes requirements and those types of things, because there's many different ways that developers are going to try and come into this community. They may come in and just KB may try to come in, and so in that case they want to develop on everything. Or maybe you'll have larger lot developers that want to come in and just parcel up 700 acres but not preserve any of the natural features. And so there's different ways for y'all to study the natural topography of the land, and based on what we learned from that, talk about in this plan about developing regulations that get you the patterns of development out there that you want. Not to say that you want development out there, but as I've already always said, sometimes you can't win every battle out in ETJ.
So along those lines, I have a citizen asking me about concepts regarding requiring a certain amount of green space preservation for development. So creating percentages of park space or natural space for anyone who purchases and wants to develop land. Is that possible in the ETJ?
Absolutely. And so, that's the, that right there is a good way to emphasize how critical the comprehensive plan and the future land use plan is, because at the end of the day, you don't want development in your TJ. You want development in your city limits. And so what the comp plan can do through the future land use plan is give you the ability that when somebody comes in to the ETJ and says they want to develop, you have the ability to get them into the city and have them develop under your regulations. So, you know, in a lot of cities, the easiest way to do that is through your utilities. You can tell somebody, okay, if you want to go out there, you're going to connect to our utilities, and you're not going to get our utilities unless you come into the city limits. Well, you guys don't have that benefit. The same way, you know, like a city like Bulverde where I work doesn't have that benefit. So that's one negotiating element you don't have is through utilities, but you've got other methods to do that. And the most important one is your subdivision regulations, which we're working on right now. And so through that,
Sorry. So we just watched, or I don't know if anyone else in here did, but we participated in a land use educational program. It was 3 hours long. Mr. Borges, I believe is how you say his name. He said the subdivision code does not apply to the ETJ. He answered it even in a public question at the end.
Maybe he was confused on that question. Yeah, your subdivision regulations are really your only tool you have in the ETJ.
He was saying
Zoning
the
doesn't.
platting regulations are what you use.
Well, platting is subdivision.
Okay, it's
So, yeah.
under,
Platting, and so subdivision, I know I'm getting in the weeds on platting when we're talking about comprehensive plan, but there's a relationship between the comprehensive plan and your regulations. And
Yeah.
so I think it makes sense going into the weeds on this. And so a subdivision of land is basically the act of dividing two parcels into one. Platting is the regulatory process of approving a subdivision.
Mhm.
And so there's some cases where subdivisions are exempt from having to plat. If it's over 5 acres and if it has access and those types of things. But most cases, most stuff that you guys are going to get, like the Lennar homes, the KB homes, they have to plat. And when they have to plat, they have to abide by your regulations, namely environmental regulations, putting roads where your thoroughfare plan says roads needs to go, preserving trees, dedicating parkland, dedicating open space, not developing in your floodplain. And so that subdivision code, which is which the tool is the platting process, that's what gets, developers have to abide by that. And I'll tell you 9 times out of 10 or 9.9 times out of 10, they're not going to want to abide by those regulations. They can't, because their financial structures are set up assuming that you guys are going to give them all sorts of relief, just like a lot of other cities get. And so they're going to come to you and say, hey, we don't want to have to comply with this regulation of your subdivision code. Can we do a development agreement? But you still have that negotiating mechanism.
Yeah.
And you can use that development agreement to get things that y'all need in exchange for the concessions that they make. So to answer your question about parklands, absolutely. And, you know, traditionally a lot of cities have parkland requirements. They say you need to dedicate X amount of acres of parkland per number of units that you're going to put in. And some cities are more lenient. Unfortunately, they're more lenient. They let developers dedicate floodplain as parkland. Don't recommend that. Or they can do fee in lieu. Most cities are
They can do what?
I'm sorry.
What would you just say? They can do what?
They can opt as an option, instead of dedicating land, they can provide the city a fee in lieu.
Oh,
And what most cities are transitioning to now is not only requiring dedication of parkland, they're requiring fees to actually improve the parkland because it costs so much. So these are all things. And so these are not things we're probably going to get like into the weeds on the comprehensive master plan. With the comprehensive master plan, it's high level. So it's going to say, we recommend you do a Parks and Recreation master plan or an update. In the comprehensive plan, it's going to say, we recommend that we introduce these things into our codes, or we recommend that we do a more detailed Parks and Recreation master plan to analyze these things. Or, you know, the comprehensive master plan is going to say, based on the things that we learned in the existing conditions analysis, this comprehensive plan creates an objective to redo the subdivision code and introduce steep slopes requirements, introduce riparian buffer requirements to protect natural waterways so developers can't come in and scrape every little small, shallow waterway. You know, developers will come in and they'll scrape every single feature off the land and take all the water that used to trickle through natural streams and shoot it down a road into a detention pond that only treats 1% of the pollutants and the rest of it goes into your natural waterways. So what y'all can do through this is look at the existing topography out there and introduce regulations that preserve the natural drainage of water. And then that gives you basis. Again, that comprehensive plan is always your your legal basis for the regulations that you have. So when a developer comes in and says,
Right.
I don't want to follow that code, where do you get the backbone to tell me? Like, well, our comprehensive said so, and our citizens said they want this. So
So-
it helps you strengthen your codes.
So
Sorry.
would it be beneficial to have a private consultant come out and do like an environmental impact statement on those lands? That way we can identify where those are in our ETJ?
No, I mean, well, honestly, we can do that for you. That's the great thing about K-Freeze is we've got, there's 80 of us. 2 of us are city planners and the other 78 are engineers that can do that. So a big part of our practice, and AB, who's actually the city engineer, his special focus is drainage. And so that's what he does. We can do that for you guys, and it's not, for a comprehensive master plan, you're not going to go and literally do like a very deep level environmental impact like a developer will do when they come in to develop a piece of property. They have to do a very, a much more detailed environmental assessment of the property. For a comprehensive plan, what you're going to do is just look high level throughout the city limits in the ETJ and look at the topography. And by doing that, looking at those natural contours, we can identify areas that have steep slopes. We can identify the natural watersheds and the tributaries and those types of things. And we can start to look at, which areas have large,
Catchments.
exactly, large catchments. Is this particular tributary, does it have, 600 acres draining into it? Does it have 200 acres? And then based on that, we can start to look at, what areas are more environmentally sensitive and what is the implementation tool for that? Well, then buffer zones from those particular areas.
I think we have some of that work done already because
Cool.
there's a Jacobs Well management zone. I know part of our ETJ is in that. And then the Trinity people have analyzed this area to no end because of all the karst features. And then the POSAC grants had a lot of documents. Ray Don was just here, but they had a lot of mapping and stuff done. So it probably just means we reach out to professionals like you were saying and gather that information. I think it probably already exists and then get it to y'all. Y'all help us analyze. One thing though, I was reading the state code on ETJ waterway protection, and it seemed to indicate that a city had to have 10,000 residents minimum in order to implement some of these waterway regulations in the ETJ.
No, we'll have to go look at that. I mean, to my knowledge, this is all environmental stuff you can do through your subdivision regulations. So
Okay.
I think there's differences between if you want to do stuff outside your subdivision regulations, but everything I'm talking about can be done through the applicability of Chapter 212 of the Local Government Code.
Yeah.
Chapter 212 is platting and subdivisions, and so that gives cities general law like this city or home rule the ability to protect its ETJ, and as long as you, to my knowledge, as long as you adopt those things through your subdivision code, you're fine to implement it. Sometimes cities get into trouble when they have those codes located, those requirements located in other chapters. At the end of the day, it's all how you link things to the state law.
Okay.
Everything you do, you got to be pursuant to Chapter 39, pursuant to 211, pursuant to 212.
Yeah.
So as long as we link those things up.
Yeah, I attended the presentation that was made, and I heard what he had to say about the subdivision and the ETJ, and I tend to agree with, and not only you, but a prior law firm. We had this discussion, this was several years ago. We asked, when we were working on the Heritage Tree ordinances and the water protection ordinances, we asked the attorneys, who at the time was a law firm from San Antonio, to give us an opinion about these ordinances and the ETJ. And you're right, Chapter 212, we need to make sure that when we're writing our subdivision code now that it complies. It's not consistent. But we also have Chapter 50, and we have the trees, we have, and signs. Many of our individual ordinances do apply to the ETJ. So we can protect using those individual ordinances.
That's right.
And, the zoning part, that's,
Right.
but you can preserve the water conservation, avoid the pollution of signage, tree protection, all of those we have. And then you mentioned, you can also talk about what impact it's going to have on our city, such as traffic, those things. So, and honestly, that's one of the things I worry about those chapters, particularly 154, 155. They're not clearly in compliance with state law. So when you review those, we can make it stronger.
And that's the nice thing is we're working on those I'm working on those right now. So some of the discussion that we're having, I'm going to be able to roll into that.
Yeah, I think this is good.
Yeah. So and something else I just wanted to hit on, because the environmental aspect is such a huge part, because
I think I think this is excellent discussion, because as we work into the comprehensive plan, it's educating all of us as to how we can protect not just the city, but our future resources. I like this. I'm glad. So everybody, please, we want to have input.
I'm going to throw out something, and not to get too academic on you guys, but there's a book called Design with Nature. And it's written by a guy, he had a TV show back in the 60s. His name is Ian McCarg. And it is along the lines of talking about environment.
Yeah.
That's a big thing that's going to come out of this, because, when we do that assessment of the environment, there's such a huge relationship there from what that tells us in terms of us being able to have conversation about what kind of land uses and how you want development to happen in the ETJ and ultimately as it gets annexed into the city. There's really not two different ways, but there's a few different ways. And I'll give you an example. Bulverde, they kind of, in similar growing community, development comes in and their policy is to keep large lots. They want large lots, 1 to 5 acre lots. And that's a good thing. But at the end of the day, everything gets platted out. So nothing in there preserved. Natural water courses, trees, areas where heritage trees are clustered together. Those end up all being on private property. But then there's other ways to look at developing in nature called conservation style development, where when a developer comes in, everything that's natural, steep slopes, usually those are kind of carved off, and those are dedicated as natural areas. And so what ends up being developed is a smaller portion of the property. What ends up being platted out for single family lots is a smaller portion of the property. Maybe those lots are smaller. So maybe in that cluster that actually does get developed, those lots are small and that little cluster is dense like a little village, but you ended up preserving large amounts of area around it. Whereas, again, the flip side is Bulverde, where, what actually gets platted is very low density, and maybe you did preserve what's there, but that's still on the table, and people can still, add, pads for RVs. They can still plow, and change the terrain and take it from natural to more caliche. And just because you're not paving something doesn't mean that you're not changing how impervious it is. Mm-hmm. And so there's different ways to look at it. And I'm not going to come out here and say which one I think you ought to do, because there's examples of how both have been successful. But these are all things that we'll be looking at. And this is probably going on about how important the existing conditions
I'm
are.
going to look for the, I'm sure I have it in my files, that what Ms. Ortiz was the attorney, and share it with the book.
All right, does anyone else have any more feedback before we move on to the next thing? Again, you can bring it to the next meeting. It doesn't have to be now, but if you do have it now, I'd love to hear it. No? All right, so we're going to move on to the next item in our packet. It's the second to last page. If you look at the front of it, it says Comprehensive Plan Focus Group Overview. This is item 5 on our regular agenda. It says present focus group plan, get feedback, ask for volunteers, and begin planning. So if you'll remember last meeting, Mr. Camp asked for some sort of visual on this. He suggested a Venn diagram. Brandon, I just forgot your last name. Mullane. Yep. Mr. Mullane added in a lot of these bullet points, so I tried to copy them as fast as possible and get them into this Venn diagram for us all. And then if you'll notice, we also had current volunteers for the natural systems. Justin and Jason spoke up to assist or give feedback, since the golf course does own a majority of the natural land and trees here. Physical systems, Diane spoke up and volunteered her time. Land use was already designated to Lydia and myself and Brandon. So this is kind of what we're looking at is four focus groups. And then you can see the bullet points under them and you can kind of see where they overlap. Now, this is just a summary. Obviously, there's probably more significant overlap there that could have been listed. I just was giving examples so we understand what we're looking at. Then at the bottom, you see the goal. The goal is to conduct 2 to 4 meetings to research and develop writing for this portion of the comprehensive plan. These meetings can be held at the city hall or a location of your choosing. What we need are volunteers from our work group to assist in leading these areas, and then a plan. So essentially, we'll put a call out to citizens to contribute either by attending meetings or taking mini surveys. And you are welcome to reach out to friends in the neighborhood, obviously not outside of Woodcreek, but so it can be very personal. It could also, the city can assist in gathering larger, more diverse groups. I think a combination of both would be the best, because we don't want to work in our isolated bubbles of feedback, but you do get more buy-in if you reach out to people individually,
Are
if
the
you-
focus groups subject to the Open Meetings Act?
No, they are not.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to be as transparent as possible
Mhm.
and invite attendance from the entire city.
I
Anybody
wasn't
who's interested.
advocating it, I was just checking.
Yeah.
Because you said a location of your choosing, and so I thought of the impact of that on the location of your choosing. So-
Right. So you could have, if you have a nice patio garden
Mhm.
area, you could invite people over to your home.
Mhm.
You could say, hey, let's meet at the local coffee shop. You could have large gatherings or a series of micro meetings. I mean, this is really kind of up to you all. And then myself and Mayor Pro Tem LeBrun are also available to assist in any way possible. But the goal is to get us all branching out and kind of taking on chunks of the plan and working.
And I have one, a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission who would like to be involved. That's Tomas. Paul.
Okay.
And I think he would be for physical. Because it's just Diane. So I will call Tomas. And he sent me a note that he was out of town, but he was ready to work. So, and then on Jerry, you had expressed interest. So that
I would like to be involved, with your permission, on the ETJ segment,
Okay.
because I think, and this is personal, we have, in my opinion, we have no room for commercial development, basically, within the city limits of Woodcreek as it stands now. But in the ETJ, there may very well be some lucrative opportunities for the city.
Okay. I don't disagree at all. I think that's relevant. Yeah, we only have a handful of lots open in general inside the city limits, and then only a handful of those would be appropriate for rezoning to commercial. So, yeah, it is limited.
I'm looking at physical systems, and this is what, and we have trails. Is it possible to get Mr. Rollins? Is this possible to get someone in that group that comes from the parks perspective?
Well, I was a little bit torn, given the kind of the natural systems and the physical systems, because the parks has a foot in each one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess maybe what we could do is, I'm thinking I probably would want to participate in the natural systems with myself, but then maybe we could get another member of, who would really be good if we could get him in the physical systems would be Cody Abney.
Yeah.
Because Cody Abney builds multi-million-dollar buildings, and
If-
he really understands the way.
What's his name?
That would be great. if
Cody
you could.
Abney,
Abney.
yeah.
And he has volunteered for the Platinum Panel as well. And because of the way our committees and boards are structured, he can actually participate in two. So bringing him in on that is very accurate, because he'll already be working on it in the Platinum Panel. So he'll essentially be I mean, if he's appointed to it, I don't see why he wouldn't be, but
Okay.
he has applied for that.
Yeah, Cody has a depth of experience that exceeds most other people in the city, and we need to capitalize on free work from him as much as possible.
All right. Any questions on this? Are we understanding the diagram or how these overlap? Obviously, like I pointed out, there's probably more bulletin points to add. There's more ways they will overlap and we'll discover as we work on them. But this was just to kind of put on paper the nebulous thoughts that were going on before.
So I have a comment. I mentioned that I would be interested in talking about traffic calming last time. And
Yes.
so that's in the physical systems. I'm not really sure, like, would we like have one large focus group that worked on all of these? Or is it, like, I don't really have a lot of input on some of these. So I'm not sure.
I
how-
think it could work out however it seemed relevant. When you start reaching out for public involvement, you might have a lot of people that want to work on traffic calming and roads, but have zero interest or knowledge base in drainage. And if we can't get the public to give feedback on everything, we can generate it ourselves and throw back to K-Freeze and sort of the science of the matter to help us and give more information. But I think that you could have little mini subgroups for each bulletin point, or maybe you realize, okay, the public doesn't have a lot of input right now on, one of these, and that in itself is information to include.
Diane, I'd suggest also to, a lot of the work for public comment or understanding has already been done in the survey. Looking at the open-ended comments within the survey really help out looking for those key words. Drainage, particularly traffic calming, is a huge one inside some of those questions.
That's a great point.
That's a good.
The focus groups can analyze the survey itself.
Exactly. And so if that answers your, I had a kind of a follow-up question to the 2 to 4 meetings and the research and development. Research and development, is that to develop questions out of these bullet points for this focus group? Trying to help myself define what this focus group ought to be doing. In my mind's eye, I see these bullets, and these are really good bullet points for each of the 4. Taking water, for example, and making maybe 2 questions for each to really focus on, and perhaps based from that survey. If that makes sense to how to get this focus group running, essentially.
I'll be honest, looking at this diagram, I mean, I just love it. I think this diagram right here is going to
Yeah,
be the
well done.
architecture that carries, or has the potential to be the architecture that carries through the entire
That's right.
plan. I mean, really, the natural systems, physical systems, fiscal systems, and land use. And so, in terms of the focus group's job, yeah, I think one of the first meetings probably each focus group has. Your point, Deborah, you were talking about new surveys and new questions. That's something we can talk about is developing, and me attending these 2, helping the focus group identify additional questions that we want to go put in the new surveys. And then based on that, it can, based on what we hear back, that starts to define the vision of the plan right there. And obviously we're going to have a meeting, but that's the day that we can start to present at the meeting that we
Right.
heard back on this. And so that's the job.
That makes sense.
One of the things on the agenda today is to begin planning, and I think we're all anxious for the focus groups to start. So if we have the volunteers, could we, this is a thought that just occurred to me, so if it's a bad one, I don't care if people think so. They tell me, please. I don't care if you tell me so. Once we know who's in which group, maybe do an orientation, bring the focus groups, the participants together, and if Brandon, and kind of give everybody, this is what you're here for, this is what you're going to do. So everybody goes out with the same understanding of what the focus group is going to do. And then we're going to look at those of you who are volunteer from this group, when we bring citizens, we're going to look at you and Jason and Natural to, if you can bring in citizen volunteers, but you will be kind of like the de facto leaders. But I think if we can do, and I know that we have an April 6th meeting, and maybe that gives us 2 weeks to work on, as part of that meeting, bring the focus groups and do an orientation. Those who have volunteered here, and Deborah is going to be the focus group coordinator or leader, but Brandon, you can make sure everybody's on the same page and goes forth with an understanding, and we don't have, what is that okay?
Yeah, each focus group leader is kind of a disciple. Go bring
All
helpers
right.
to help with this.
Okay. So April 6th, I'll come up with an orientation, maybe just hold it post-meeting, just ask everybody to stay around for an extra 30 minutes. I can say right now, if I was leading a focus group and I was volunteering, what I would do is I would, take my little Venn diagram here. I would probably brainstorm to see if there's anything else I came up with that's not in the bulletin points, maybe even try to designate what overlaps where into other systems. And then from there, I would try to generate how I'm going to reach out to the public. Am I going to ask the city to bring people in? Am I going to put a call out for it? Am I asking my neighbors, my friends, maybe a combination of all of them? And then what I would do is set my first meeting. And in my first meeting, I would do a basic introduction to the goal of the group, sort of like what we're doing, just like, kind of a brief overview of a comp plan, the work. From there, I would generate, like you said, questions, right? How do we fill in what's missing from the survey? I would probably work on, I think your point of analyzing the previous survey is excellent. Go in and highlight all of the comments that have anything to do with your focus group. Get them all together. I wouldn't want to create extra work, so I'm not saying retype it, but sometimes that helps my brain just sort of isolate the essential information and then come up with a plan of how we're going to involve the public. Once we decided, are we going to send out little mini surveys? Who are we going to send them to? How are we going to generate that? You can use online stuff, is free, especially if it's like just a couple questions. It's really easy to pop a link in and communicate. Some of the communication might need to go through Mayor Pro Tem LeBrun or myself, as far as just like, okay, this looks like a great city communication or not. And then the ultimate goal, no matter how many meetings you have, 2 to 4 is just recommended, would be to come up with some kind of product, whether it's bulletin points, outlines, you actually wrote the paragraphs to put into the plan, but you would want to look at that outline and sort of address this outline somehow. The current condition, the results that you received, then what the future recommendations or vision would be. What are your recommendations based on the public feedback you got as far as like crafting our vision for Woodcreek? That's what I would do.
I think that's right. I think that's right. So can we do?
I'll write it all down.
You can do, like I said, you're right on point. Just want to make sure that everybody else who's in a focus group, that everybody follows that, how would I say, follow what you have just said, that scope that you said. So I think if we can, next meeting, bring in everybody and you lead and say, this is, you're members of this group, this is what we're going to do, make what you just said, do it for everybody, and then we're ready to go.
Okay. And if you think of anyone you want to reach out to kind of be a lead with you, like we just kind of volunteered Cody Abney, we don't know about his availability, but so if there are specific individuals you want to bring in on the top level, that would be very helpful, right? So you're seeking additional widespread citizen input, but if you have somebody would be a great kind of like co-lead or co-head of the focus group, I think we're open to volunteer, whoever's willing to help out. The more of our citizens involved in this in general, the better the plan will be. The stronger it'll be, the more comprehensive it'll be, the more buy-in there is, and the more support there will be from the public in the long term.
I've got a question on the natural systems. When you talk about water, what does that mean?
So there's a lot of components to that. There's the water we drink. There's the water running into our streams. There is, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's
Does it
literally,
include rainwater collection?
it definitely could in the vision plan, as far as like maybe in our vision, we say something like the city, we recommend the city create incentives for rainwater collection programs.
Yeah, we just, currently, our city really prohibits any large-scale use of rainwater because of the catchment is a visible piece of infrastructure that has to be hidden or is precluded. You know, it's just something that I know it's a nit, and I know I'm getting into the weeds on this, but water is such a big deal. I would hope we would address rainwater somewhere on that.
No,
Okay.
absolutely. I don't think there's any getting in the weeds when you're scoping out. So yeah, I think in terms of natural systems, what we're really looking is, runoff, I think, in watersheds and flood prone areas, flood damage prevention. I think in natural systems, we're looking at what occurs naturally. But in terms of, physical systems and land use as well, I don't know at the moment where we'd fit that in there, but I think what you're talking about is low impact, kind of low impact development, coming up with ways to, mitigate runoff. And so that may fit into the land use. I don't know, honestly. I think that's an important thing that the plan.
Well, that's what I was wondering. I couldn't figure
I'll think
out
about
where
it.
it fit.
Yeah, let me think about that. That's a good one.
Okay.
It's low impact. It's a low impact development
A great
solution.
discussion for the focus group
Yeah.
nonetheless when we all get together.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How do we incorporate it? I mean, it seems like it's a goal. I'm a little surprised the city's regulating vision, because I was under the impression state law prevented cities from doing that anymore. So I'll have to double check.
Regulating vision.
Regulating the aesthetics, meaning they cannot prevent you from installing a rainwater collection facility based on aesthetics alone. It can also be installed in the front yard now, I believe, as well.
Really?
And so I'll have to look
Okay.
into that. That might be somewhere we're out of alignment with the state law.
Sure.
So-
I'd love to hear clarification on that.
So I have a problem with my availability coming up. So
Me
do we
too.
need to talk about this offline, or I'm not really going to be available to work very much on this, I would say, till like May 18th, and I hate to announce that, but so I need to have a co-chair on the physical systems, I guess, until that point.
Maybe. I mean, possibly. I think that we're going to have a lot on our plate moving along. So if some areas are a little bit more delayed than others, I don't know that it will present a huge problem. In the meantime, we might go ahead and get it started, but I don't think your availability would really actually be a problem. Does that make sense? Because we're talking about 1 month. If we have 1 month delay on the physical systems, but we're able to knock out some of these other ones in April, then, the timing might be just perfect.
Okay.
Also, the Platinum Panel will hopefully get started soon, and there's a lot of work they're going to be doing that's going to be relevant to that focus group. So the delay might actually work out.
Again, I think this architecture here for the focus groups is just great, because what this is doing is it's now allowing this committee to focus on, the plan and completing the plan at a higher level and scoping that out. So we've done that as a group. We've scoped out these focus groups, and now each focus group can meet on April 6th and start to scope out their own pursuit. So we've created a really good management system here
Great.
organically.
So unless y'all have any other questions, I'm going to move on to the last item. We're hitting about an hour and a half here soon, and so I'd like to have us wrap up under 2 hours if possible, so everyone can get on with their day. I mean, obviously no limits here, but just out of respect for your time. You can always shoot input via email if you think of something later. You can always send it to us. We'll collect it in our notes and bring it into the next meeting. So please don't be afraid to use email. All right, the last item on our agenda is a complete topic shift for us. So it is item number 6. It says introduce minimum lot size project for zoning, receive input, and possibly finalize to send to the City of Woodcreek Planning and Zoning. So let me back up and give a little history here. So this was sent to us by City Council. And what occurred was it has come to our attention that we do not address minimum lot size in our zoning in any real concrete way. There's information on building setbacks. There's information on minimum building requirements. There's information on impervious coverage requirements, garages, parking, all of that's there. And if you do the basic math, you kind of come up with this chart that I created as a concept for what the total minimum lot size is. So our task is to kind of think about, do these minimum lot sizes make sense? And consider making a recommendation to P&Z on what our minimum lot sizes should be to incorporate into the zoning code. And we might not get to the point today of being able to make a recommendation. This is literally just introducing the item for the first time. So council has already set minimum lot size for future subdivision in our subdivision code for single family residents, SF1 through 6 to 12,000 square feet. We no longer allow subdivision under that. However, we have existing lots throughout the city, and in the future, builders might request certain zoning out in the ETJ, and so this zoning information is relevant to that. So if you look at the chart, I included the minimum build number, the garage required, the parking required, the impervious coverage calculation at 30%, and essentially taking all that into account, you come up with a total minimum lot size. So for example, for a SF1 family house, like residence, the minimum lot size possible is 8,334 square feet. So a developer could potentially, inside the city limits in SF1, make a case for a variance to build on that size lot. So, I mean, I know it's probably hard to understand what I'm talking about on your first go at this. It's definitely taking me months to get to this point. Do y'all have any questions, I guess, just to start?
Well, one question I have is, are any of the present lots that are not built on yet the size that once you plug in the minimum build size, the garage and the parking, that you can't actually legally build a structure on there?
Britton, do you know of anything offhand?
There are several areas in town where we have a smaller lot, but it depends on the zoning. It's because what Deborah is talking about is the SF1, where we require 1,500 square foot home. Well, we might only require 1,250 square foot home in an SF6. So
I guess I'd further qualify that in SF1.
okay.
So are there any lots in the zoning of SF1 that you couldn't comply with all of these building requirements?
No,
Okay.
the builders like to make bigger houses.
Mm-hmm.
If it is the largest thing they can on the lot.
Right. No, I guess what I'm saying, yeah, is if you plugged in all of these numbers and you had more square footage than the impermeable cover would allow, could it actually fit on a small lot? Did that make sense?
I believe what was described as the smallest lot possible would be that. And
Right.
in SF1,
We don't have any that are smaller than that?
no, not in SF1.
Okay, okay.
So it's kind of a weird concept because, basically the goal that we're looking for is to actually plug in a number into the zoning code. So right now you have these calculations out to the side. And I did those, using a function on the internet, but those minimum lot size numbers are not actually in the zoning code. Somebody has to go in and do all of that math. So the possibility is we recommend these numbers to P&Z and let them sort of deliberate and think about it, or we come up with another number. I will say I did the work to establish what a house would look like for the 8,334 square foot home, minimum lot size for SF1. And that home is very limited on what it can look like. It has to be built in a very specific shape, and the parking has to have gravel inlays in it. You cannot have full concrete parking. So these numbers are extremely limiting. We might consider raising them, not to limit subdivision, but to basically establish that these are not reasonable restrictions.
But you could have a house that's a two-story house that the footprint of it would be closer to a 750 square foot house because you would have the same, but you have a minimum size of 2,000 on a two-story house. But even that being said, the footprint of the first floor would be like 1,000 square feet.
So I guess I should have been more clear. This minimum build is the footprint on the bottom level required. You
Okay.
cannot go below that. So basically, these minimum lot size numbers in the column on the right are extremely low and very restrictive. To be able to actually build this structure on a lot that small is very, very difficult. It's going to take some extreme engineering, extreme planning, and you're going to be maxed out on your impervious coverage there. So what I was saying is we might consider raising all of these numbers, saying our minimum lot for an SF1 is actually 9,000 square feet.
They make sense to me based on, what I see many times is a misunderstanding on some people on why can I build, my lot size? What's my lot size? And why can I build this concrete patio? So this is very clear to me. They do make sense. And I think it's good because we've had some homes built in the past. A developer that was in this area and was in my neighborhood 10, 15 years ago. And we have some homes that should not have been built on those lots based on the size of the lot, should not have been approved. This is prior to your time, and you know which ones I'm talking about because he lives in the same area. They should not have been approved, and they have caused, how would I say, in our neighborhood, they have exacerbated the problem of the flooding down the streets. So they make sense to me.
I don't know which y'all's timeline is on wanting to adopt this, but this could be definitely a totally pertinent topic for the land use focus group to take up as well. If you want to do something sooner than that, totally understand, because sometimes outside of a comprehensive plan, you just got a problem that the community wants to address and you need to stop the bleed. But if there's stuff y'all want to do right now, definitely.
I don't think there's any rush. It's just an introduction to it so that when it does come to making decisions or sending things to P&Z, it's not the first time anybody's seen this. So this is the time to ask questions, to make sure you understand the concept so that moving forward, we have that basis of knowledge to be able to actually discuss this maybe more in depth and make clear recommendations.
No, it's a great chart.
Yeah, I'd suggest citing how you came up with these numbers.
Yeah, I think that the visual of the calculation is self-explanatory, even if 8,334 is a weird number, but you can see where you came up with it, right? So
Yeah, it's basically
I like that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. It's the math worked backwards, and there's actually I used a tool on the internet to help me because I was having a hard time just producing it on my own. But essentially, when you add the minimum footprint at the bottom, the bottom of the building, if you can have 2 stories, that's what the minimum build is. And then the garage, all of the garage spaces for most residents are 10 by 20, I believe. Is it 10 by, no. What is it? What do you
20
think?
by 20.
20 by 20. Yeah. So 20 by 20 is how you get to the 400. And then some of them, if you look down to like the fourplexes, that's just multiplied by 4 because each residence is required to potentially have a carport of that size. That was actually silent in the code. That number is inferred. And then you go into parking. So the parking, we require 3 10 by 20 parking spots for all houses right now. That's something that P&Z is considering maybe reducing and counting the garage as one. But right now, we require 3 parking spots for all residences. So if you look at the fourplex, again, that's just times by 4. The code's a little bit silent on that. It's an inferred number. If you follow the code by, by its letter, that's what you would have to build. So you have all of those numbers, you add them up, and then you cannot max out your impervious coverage. So, that would be 30% of the lot size. So that's, okay, sorry, I flipped that.
It's
So that,
an algebra problem.
yeah, so that number essentially is saying if you did nothing else on the land and all you did was build the house, the garage, and the parking, that used up 30% of your impervious coverage. And so the minimum size that your lot could be would be that last number. So it's like a backwards math problem. What is the total size of the lot if you used up all your impervious coverage? So these are minimums. These are the smallest the lots could be. I don't recommend that, is kind of what I'm getting at in general. If you were to ask me today what I would say to P&Z, I would say we need to round all of these up to the next 1,000, consider maybe even adding another 1,000 square feet onto that. Because in speaking with our city manager, Mr. Lewis, one of the most prevalent problems we have in our city right now is contract builders coming in and designing homes and building them, maxing out the impervious coverage. And then when the actual home buyer comes in, they want to add a porch. They want to add XYZ, and now they cannot. And so we're getting into this place where we're binding up residents' use of their property. And we don't want to change our impervious coverage because that's what protects our water, our drinking water. But we do need to consider how we limit development and basically kind of addressing that through zoning, through other methods. Am I explaining this? Yeah, I mean,
That
yeah.
No, that
makes
makes
perfect sense.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And again, linking it back to the comprehensive master plan, I always say comp plan, but linking it back to that, that's one thing you do in the environmental conditions assessment and in the vision too, is you look at these areas, you look at these watersheds, and you look at what's the impervious coverage right now, you look at what kind of impervious coverage do we want to have in the future on these areas as a whole, and then from that, you're able to look at, okay, what's the impervious coverage we limit on the development, but at the same time, then it's kind of a backwards math problem. What's the end result? How much impervious coverage do we want to be able to allow on the piece of property itself? Because right now, the code says new development that comes in, no more than 30%. So that's for the whole development. That includes the roads and everything. And so I think kind of the intent is that a lot maybe has no more than 30%, but after you do the roads and everything else in the house, there's not a lot left. And so who ends up getting the burden? It's the end user. So I think that's the goal here, is kind of looking at areas as a whole, looking at the individual developments, and then looking at the individual lots too, and just coming up with regulations and limitations that are related. That way you're able to add a pool if you want. So yeah, makes perfect sense.
All right, do y'all have any more questions about this right now? Or any suggestions on it or initial thoughts? It'll likely come back up again. Obviously, we're not ready to make any recommendation to P&Z today, but.
So I do have a question. So the council has set a minimum lot size for future subdivision to 12,000 square feet for SF 1 through 6. So that means when lots are being subdivided, is that?
So that is an effort right now to sort of plug a leak, if that makes sense. That could be reconsidered and adjusted in the future, or it could be the number we go off. We say, okay, everything SF 1 through 6, the minimum lot size is 12,000 square feet. We like that, that makes a lot of sense. So in prepping for the council meeting, I actually calculated all of Champion Circle and a huge portion of Woodcreek to get an average lot size. So I went in and I grabbed every single lot size. I added them all up and then divided them by the number of them. And what I found was that essentially most of Woodcreek, right, because the only other area with smaller lots is like the backside of Augusta Drive. But it seems to be that 12,000 square feet is a good average for the development of our city for SF1. We do have other areas like where Mayor Pro Tem LeBrun lives and City Manager Lewis lives, that's actually zoned different. I believe it's SF6 possibly. And so they have smaller lots, smaller build sizes. It's a little bit different. But I did the entire Champion Circle loop, all of Canyon Creek, all of the Palmer loop, and then up into Woodcreek Drive. And I came up with the averages that are over 12,000 square feet. So it seems like that's a solid number for us to consider as far as future development as a density that we, quote unquote, like or are considering allowing.
For SF1, correct?
For SF1, yes. But if you look at our duplex, we currently, based on our zoning code, allow a duplex to be put on a lot that small. So that's very high density, so that's sort of our long-term goal, is to look at this and see what kind of density we would be allowing by leaving these numbers. Because if our subdivision code says 12,000 square feet is a minimum, but under SF1, we have these other numbers, or for the duplexes, or SF4, a developer can come in and request a variance. And if it's in our zoning code, and our zoning code allows smaller lots, they have a legitimate request then. So it's just something to consider. But the 12,000 square feet basically came out from, that was what was in our subdivision code, and we just removed a caveat to it that was kind of like a loophole for now. That whole area has to be rewritten. K-Freeze is working on it to bring it into alignment with state code.
So we need a motion.
I don't think we need it.
We don't motion.
I mean,
I
a
don't
motion
think
to
so.
end, unless you all have any more questions, feedback, concerns, thoughts, requests.
Okay. Well, we have been very efficient, and we have done a lot of business in about an hour and a half. So thank you to all of you for being here today, and also for your willingness to participate in the focus groups. If we continue at this pace, we will meet our goals. So April 6th, and one of the things is, if you are unable to be here, because we know it's a very intense schedule, and we understand people have commitments. If you're unable to be here, one of the reasons that we're recording, and hopefully we will have fewer challenges in the future, is do review the recording. They're getting posted within 2 days of the meeting. Do review the recording, and never hesitate to reach to us if you have any questions. We just want you to continue to be engaged and continue to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.